growing up Unitarian, God is love was the theology that I grew up with. I also recommend that to parents. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself. One thing you may not know is that I played rugby up until about 13 years ago. For the uninformed, rugby is like a football game that never stops and the players don't wear pads. It's a rigorous game. Soccer, we call soccer the gentleman's game played by ruffians, and rugby, we say, is the ruffian's game played by gentlemen. So in rugby, you have to do a lot. You have to do the whole range of physical activity. You have to jump and run and sprint and pull yourself up from the ground and wrestle and pull and push and gouge and all kinds of things. And that's just before the game begins. So in order to be in shape to play rugby, you have to work out a lot, right? So I used to be about 25 more pounds heavier and bigger in muscle because I went to the gym 3 times in the night, 3 times in the week. I worked out with the team 2 nights, and then I played on Saturday, and Sunday I rested. And when I went to the gym, I didn't go into the gym and just say, well, I think I'll just run a little, or I'll just work on my abs a little bit. I went in and I did everything in the gym. Every single element. Nowadays I go in, I don't even know what some of those machines do. I look at them and I say, I'm not going anywhere near that part of the gym. But when I was doing that, I was working to work every fiber of my body. So I thought about how is that relevant to us? And I want to give you this pitch today. Welcome to the spiritual gym. Here you can work out the elements of your spiritual life. We have a nursery, a place for your kids to learn. And you can meditate on Sundays and Mondays to work out your mindfulness muscles. You can take a class or do a book study to work on your intellectual muscles. Or you can get involved in justice work or service to work on your compassion and action muscles. Or you can volunteer and practice the muscles that are for helping out and for leadership. And most of all, you can worship, where the super workout begins. Here you practice listening and generosity, contemplation and singing, and joy, and drumroll please, your relationship to God. Now, you could come to church and say, no, I just want to work on making friends muscles. But if you're going to be a spiritual athlete, you're going to have to work all those spiritual muscle groups. Now, that doesn't mean you can't come here and just let it all wash over you. That is the muscle of release and surrender, a good muscle to work. But to have the super deluxe membership, will you? Can you? Would you? All the spiritual muscle groups can be worked on here. But I know that when I say relationship to God, that begins for some of you to be like the part of the gym that we don't want to go near. So let me talk a little bit about that. The sermon title is Whether God is All in Your Head. And I've been thinking about this all week with questions like, to whom do we pray, why, and how? At Prairie Group, we discussed prayer, the church, the inevitable topics of God, theology, worship, purpose, ministry, health, and so on and so on. The thing I kept coming back to was with prayer, to whom Why? For what? I repeated to my friends the essence of what Rabbi Joshua Abraham Heschel said, a person I quote often here about prayer. He said, prayer may not save you, but it can make you worthy of salvation. Prayer may not save you, but it can make you worthy of salvation. And I thought, that is it. We who come with our imperfect selves to life, to worship, to love, can practice things like patience and generosity of spirit when we pray. We who are angry or self-righteous or indignant or broken or unfulfilled, and that is all of us at certain times, can come to practices like prayer and worship to prepare the way to re-healing those places. And that is what I call knowing God. Now let me expand. I spent the day on Friday at Presbyterian Hospital in a conference on the mind, the body, and spirit, focused on the brain and the brain activity. In that conference, Dr. Andrew Newberg, who wrote 2 books that I recommend to you, one is How God Changes Your Brain, and the other is Why God Wouldn't Go Away, Andrew Newberg, said some amazing things to the gathered clergy, doctors, hospital administrators, nurses. He danced around the line about whether God exists. He didn't conclude whether God exists, but he pointed to the effects on the brain when we practice prayer and meditation or think about that vast human idea of God. He said in so many words, it didn't matter whether God exists or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether God is active or passive or absent or present or silent or verbose. What matters is that we contemplate that large topic, that concept that humans have been struggling with for all time. Because when we do, our brains change, and they change for the better. For the most part, he said, our brains showed changes in the areas that define self over other, moving us away from a self-orientation to an orientation of oneness when we considered God and when we spent time in meditation and prayer. Our brains rewarded us when we think of holy things with lower blood pressure and a sense that we are part of something vast. So those centers of our brain that reduce anxiety and give us a sense of belonging are stimulated when we practice contemplation on the holy. When we become more active in our prayer lives, when we sit with the concept, whether we believe or not, our brains are changed. But here's the rub. For those who didn't have a practice or a notion of God as vast and present, little changed in their brains when they did those practices, when they were asked to contemplate that. So what does that mean? It means to me that we have to ask ourselves, why wouldn't we want to make those changes in the brain? What's the cost of holding on to rejecting a concept of God to our health and our well-being? In other words, if we can activate the sense of the holy in our brains, we can be more peaceful and healthy. This is what science is saying. But if we practice rejecting a concept on the grounds of our past history, or on the grounds of some reason or thought, we don't get the benefit. So I was reading another book I recommend to you. It's called When God Talks Back. It's written by an anthropologist, T.M. Lerman, who went to the Vineyard Church. It's an evangelical church. Now set aside their social issues for a moment. What she witnessed was the evangelicals in that church, their focus was on prayer and creating a personal relationship with God. They go as far as having dates with God. I mean, literally going to a restaurant and leaving the seat empty and having conversations over a meal, which seems kind of insane to me. But in another way of looking at this, Lerman says the evangelicals in that church aren't fighting the modernist argument of 50 years ago on whether God exists or not. They actually don't care. What they care about is that practice and what it does to the people in their church. And how, in a sense, God becomes real when imagined. So, in a way, they don't care whether God is real or not, something I think many of us are still arguing. What they care is that the changes in the brain and in the body and in the person are what change the world. More joy, less anxiety, less loneliness when they talk with God. Granted, they have to make a jump, or they have to make a decision to practice that until it feels okay. For us, maybe we have to climb that mountain to arrive at the place where this kind of relationship is not part of an argument we've had all our lives with religion, but something that can serve our spiritual lives, where we practice that spiritual muscle, that muscle group of the Spirit that wants us evolutionarily to locate in the brain that sense of oneness, not to remain isolated from each other. Now, I know I am challenging you who are atheists in this congregation right now hard, but stay with me for a second. I think the evangelicals are onto something. They use their imagination to jump over the question of whether God exists or not, to make it real, ignoring theological arguments to see what happens. So I got to thinking, why would we remain in a place of rejecting all this outright when we can also have this benefit? What if the wrong answer to the wrong question is whether God exists or not? What if God exists if we practice God's existence? As my colleague Galen Gingrich, Unitarian colleague, said, that God for him is the experience of belonging to everything. Don't we want more of that? So I started a practice in the spiritual gymnasium this week that I have never done formally before. And that is to write letters to God. I don't know if this practice will last. I don't know if I will gain the rewards, if I can get past myself to see what the practice can do. But here is the first letter I wrote, which I hesitatingly share with you now. Dear God, first off, thank you for everything. for the moments when I'm aware and can take in the cues of the world that teach and guide me. Thank you for this ministry, for somehow I have been blessed with what I consider a serious accident, that I, your humble servant, would find a place here and love here. And thank you for my family, for the creative chaos of parenting that I feel passes me by so quickly, that I get wrong most of the time, yet persists as a holy task to see the lives of Gabriella and Nicholas develop. It hasn't been easy, God, the balance between my church and my family, as neither know much about how I sit between them, responsible and hopeful in equal measure. I just want to say that this being human is no easy thing. At first, it all seems so fun and amazing, and then all kinds of wonderful stuff and all kinds of crap happens, and we change and we respond and we learn and we help. Most of what we become, we don't control or choose. And the loneliness of that and the anxiety and all measure of things can be kind of overwhelming. But then again, we see the clues that all this is holy. The Red Sox did win the pennant, by the way. You, God, are in all I see, and sometimes in a specific way emerge to teach me either to be humble or to revel in the miracles of life. Sometimes the lessons are how to preserve myself or persevere, and sometimes the lessons are just that life is so ordinary, yet to appreciate the ordinary is a great task. God, you are hope and a sense of belonging to everything. Do I need you as a friend, or can you be the background of it all? That is my question to you today. Yours, Daniel. More and more, I'm convinced that what we must do is go beyond our pain and upset with religion and the concept of God, and just try to form that relationship, whether it be unnatural or natural for us, for the good of the soul. To teach our children that they are loved by something that can't go away. To be in the hands of belonging in ways that will help save us from our foibles. I'm not saying I seek a God that is going to give me what I want, nor am I saying I seek a God that exists out there somewhere. But I think the rewards of God's love, whether they are all in my head or not, are ours to have, and we are worthy of them. So if we practice rejecting a word on principle or defining ourselves in dualistic ways as atheist or theist, as believer or unbeliever, as devout or not spiritual, we have missed an opportunity in the spiritual gymnasium. So your assignment, should you accept it from one of your spiritual personal trainers this week, is to write a letter or two to God, to see what comes. Will it hurt? It might help. You can send it if you want to me or to our Facebook page. We'll see what happens. They need not be works of art, just your inner self bridging the gap to the holy. What's the downside? I want to close with a sort of letter to God by my colleague, Barbara Peskin, who for many years was a minister outside of Chicago. She wrote, God, you are an absence, yet I look upon you. I know I cannot turn from the place where I last saw you. I will search the face of the void. I will continue to ask, for this question is all I have, this and my eyes, which always seek to see you face to face. a letter to God may be a good thing. That's the message.